Ancient Rome is so important to Western history. It's remembered at the peak of its empire for massive arenas, aqueducts, and military success. Believe it or not, it actually began as a small, unimpressive city on the banks of the Tiber River, founded by two mythical brothers, Romulus and Remus. Over roughly 12 centuries, Rome evolved through three distinct governmental structures: monarchy, republic, and empire, each shaping Roman society in profound ways. A firm grasp of Roman history offers modern Western society a roadmap for thinking about power, citizenship, civic virtue, and decline. Fortunately for us, there were great authors cataloging much of this. The Roman kingdom traditionally ran from about 753 BC to about 509 BC. Rome's earliest period is somewhat shrouded in legend. The city's founding myth, Romulus and Remus nursed by a she-wolf and later fratricide, signals how Romans understood themselves as fierce, chosen, and destined to rule. Historically, Rome began as a collection of settlements ruled by kings, some of whom were even Etruscan. The king held supreme authority, serving as the military commander, the chief judge, and the high priest. He was advised by a council of elders that would later become the Senate. Roman society during the monarchy was rigidly hierarchical. At the top were patricians, the aristocratic families who claimed descent from the city's founders. Beneath them were the plebeians. Those were the commoners with limited political power, but essential economic and military roles. Early Roman identity emphasized duty to family, gods, and the city, a moral code later called Mos Maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. While the monarchy provided stability, it also concentrated power dangerously. Legend says that the last king, Tarquin the Proud, had a son who raped a patrician's daughter, which proved to be an unforgivable offense. He was remembered as a tyrannical king, and his overthrow established a foundational Roman conviction that monarchy was incompatible with liberty. The Roman Republic ran from about 509 BC to about 27 BC. The expulsion of the kings ushered in the Roman Republic, which was defined by a deep fear of autocracy and a complex system of checks and balances. Power was divided among elected magistrates, the most important of which being the consuls, who served one-year terms and could veto each other. It was like having two presidents, but they only served for 1 year rather than 4. So you can imagine how, from the perspective of a common citizen, it seemed like everything was constantly changing during this period. The Senate, composed of patricians, exercised immense influence over foreign policy, finances, and tradition. The Senate was more constant than any of the elected magistrates, so the voices of the biggest personalities tended to have staying power that even the consuls couldn't wield. Popular assemblies gave citizens a voice, particularly as the plebeians gradually gained political rights. Roman society evolved dramatically during this period. The conflict of the orders saw plebeians demand, and eventually win, legal equality, access to office, and written laws called the 12 Tables. Rome's expansion across Italy and the Mediterranean transformed it from a city-state into a global power. This growth brought immense wealth, but also social strain. Small farmers were displaced by slave-worked estates. Urban poverty increased, and military service shifted from citizen farmers to professional soldiers, loyal to their generals. The Republic's ideals of civic virtue, shared sacrifice, and rule of law came under pressure from ambition and inequality. populist figures like the Gracchi brothers tried reform. Then a string of strongmen and demagogues like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar used violence and personal loyalty to seize power, encompassing the Romans in civil wars for decades. By the 1st century BC, republican institutions still existed, but their spirit had eroded. Rome had conquered the world, but it could not govern itself as it once had. The Roman Empire lasted from about 27 BC to about 476 AD in the West. Augustus, the nephew of Julius Caesar and Rome's first emperor, presented his rule as a sort of reboot of the Republic, while quietly monopolizing power for himself. Rome, who would not have a king, instead now had an emperor with all the powers of a king. The emperor held ultimate military, political, and religious authority, and the Senate became largely ceremonial, and eventually vestigial. For many Romans, this trade-off was acceptable. After decades of civil war, stability mattered to them more than political purity. Imperial Roman society was vast and diverse. Citizenship expanded beyond Italy, eventually encompassing nearly all of the free inhabitants of the empire. Infrastructure flourished. Roads, aqueducts, public baths, and forums knitted the empire together. Roman law became increasingly sophisticated, and for 2 centuries, the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, provided just that. Yet the empire also depended heavily on centralized authority, standing armies, and heavy taxation. Over time, internal decay and external pressure mounted. Political instability, economic inflation, corruption, over-reliance on mercenary forces, and difficulty managing such enormous territory weakened the state. In the West, imperial authority collapsed in the 5th century, though Roman culture and law endured, especially through the Eastern Byzantine Empire. Roman history offers no simple moral, but it does provide sobering insights. First, political structures matter, but civic character matters more. The Republic did not fall because its constitution was flawed. It fell because its leaders increasingly valued personal gain over public good. Second, extreme inequality corrodes social trust. Rome's growing gap between rich and poor destabilized its political system and made the people vulnerable to demagogues, fueling populism and violence. Third, fear can justify the erosion of liberty. Romans accepted imperial rule largely because it promised order, yet once surrendered, republican freedoms were impossible to reclaim. Finally, Rome reminds modern Americans that republics are not self-sustaining. They require an educated citizenry, respect for the law, and leaders willing to restrain their own power. Rome's story is not merely about decline. It's about transformation and about the permanent tension between liberty and authority. To study Rome is to study ourselves, but with the benefit of distance and hindsight.